Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be tackling a concept that's, well, pretty fundamental: universals.
Universals.
And we're lucky enough to have with us today an expert who can, well, help us unpack this whole thing.
Happy to be here.
Now, I know our listeners are probably familiar with the basics, right? Like, what is a universal? We're talking about things like redness or the concept of a triangle.
Right, exactly.
But we're going deeper than that, right? We're not just defining terms here. We're diving into how philosophers have, well, wrestled with this concept for centuries. And for that, we're turning to a fantastic source, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on the medieval problem of universals.
Yeah, it's a classic for a reason. This entry really digs into the nitty-gritty of how medieval thinkers grappled with universals.
And why should our listener care? Why does this matter, you ask?
Well, think about it. How we understand universals has huge implications for how we understand knowledge itself.
Exactly. Like, if math theorems are supposed to be universally true, where does that truth reside? Is it out there in the world or just in our minds?
Deep stuff. Right.
Deep stuff indeed. So, to kick things off, let's go back to the OG of universals, Plato.
Ah, yes, Plato and his famous theory of forms. It's a pretty alluring idea, actually.
Lay it on us. What's so alluring about it?
Well, imagine a realm of perfect concepts. You've got your ideal triangle, the purest form of justice, beauty, all these perfect essences just hanging out internally.
So, like a blueprint room for the universe.
Kind of. And to Plato, our world, the one we experience, it's just a shadow play of these perfect forms. So you see a wonky triangle drawn on a chalkboard.
Happens all the time in my philosophy classes.
Right. But your mind, it grasps at the true perfect triangularity behind that imperfect representation.
I can see the appeal, I have to admit. There's something very, I don't know, satisfying about the idea that there's this perfect order behind the messiness of our world.
Right. Especially for us philosophers, always seeking those eternal truths.
But hang on a second. Didn't this whole theory of forms run into some snags?
Oh, absolutely. Even you can see the problem with the perfect triangle, right?
Well, now that you mention it.
Is it equilateral, isosceles, scalene? It can't be all of them at once. That perfect realm starts to crumble under a little bit of scrutiny.
Yeah, when you put it that way,
Uh,
it kind of falls apart. So if Plato's up there in his perfect realm, I guess his student Aristotle is down here in the trenches with us.
exactly. Aristotle throws out this separate realm of forms entirely, much more grounded, practical approach. He says universals actually come from our minds.
Okay, so instead of these ethereal blueprints, it's all about how our brains work.
Precisely. You experience a bunch of different cats, and your brain goes, aha, there are some shared features here. Let's call that catness. It's abstraction. Our minds are like concept-making machines, constantly sifting and sorting, pulling out the commonalities.
I like that. It feels a lot more, I don't know, down to earth,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
But doesn't this make knowledge kind of subjective then? If it's all in our heads, how do we know we're all thinking the same catness?
Ah, there's the rub. And that's a question that philosophers are still grappling with today.
No easy answers, huh?
Mm.
So we've got Plato's elegant but kind of flawed forms and Aristotle's more practical, brain-based abstraction. Where do we go from here?
Well, now we fast forward a few centuries. Enter Boethius, picking up this philosophical baton, wrestling with questions posed by Porphyry. Are universals real things? Thoughts? Physical, non-physical?
Lots of head-scratching, I imagine.
You got it. And Boethius, he ends up siding with Aristotle. Universals can't be real things, otherwise we get those Plato-like contradictions popping up again.
Makes sense. But if they're just in our minds, how do they match up to the real world?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And it's one that medieval philosophers are going to spend a lot of time pondering.
Oh, I bet. So Boethius sets the stage, but the story's just getting started.
Oh yeah, we're just getting warmed up. Medieval thinkers are going to add their own twists and turns to this debate, bringing in God, divine ideas. You're not going to want to miss this.
Okay, I am officially intrigued. We've got Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, and a whole lot more philosophical fun to come.
Mm-hmm.
Stick with us, folks, as we dive deeper into the medieval world of universals.
All right, so we've got these universals bouncing around in our minds, but, you know, medieval philosophers couldn't leave well enough alone, right?
They had to bring God into it, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Where do universals fit in with the big picture, the ultimate reality? Well, that's where Augustine steps in. And, you know, he had a pretty interesting take on all this.
All right, I'm all ears.
Mhm.
What did Augustine have to say?
So Augustine, he proposes that universals exist as divine ideas in God's mind.
Divine ideas, huh?
Yeah, it's like God has this blueprint of perfect concepts, and everything in creation is all based on those blueprints. It's kind of a neat way to blend Plato's forms with the idea of God as the creator.
I see what you mean, yeah. Puts those perfect forms in a place that makes theological and philosophical sense.
Hmm.
But I'm guessing there were still some wrinkles to iron out.
Of course. I mean, how do you square the multiplicity of these divine ideas with the whole idea of God's absolute simplicity?
Yeah, that's a good point. Christian theology, it stresses God's oneness, right?
Yeah.
So how can you have all these different distinct ideas existing within a being of pure unity?
Tough question. It's a brain teaser for sure, like trying to fit a whole library into a single thought. Aquinas, he gives it a shot, though.
Aquinas, oh yeah, another big name in medieval philosophy.
Exactly. And he tries to bridge that gap by saying that God, in his perfect self-knowledge, he understands not only his own essence, but also all the possible ways the essence could be reflected in creation.
Okay, I think I'm following. So it's like God's knowledge is so complete, it contains the blueprints for everything that could ever exist, all wrapped up in this single, eternal act of knowing himself.
Exactly. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Mind-blowing is right. Okay, so we've got these divine ideas, these perfect blueprints hanging out in God's mind. But how do we, mere mortals, get access to them?
Well, that's where Augustine introduces this idea of divine illumination.
Divine illumination. So is it like we get a cosmic download or something?
Well, Augustine, he suggests that God, he kind of gives our minds a boost, a divine light, if you will, to help us grasp these eternal truths. Without it, we'd just be, I don't know, fumbling around in the dark.
I get it, yeah. It's like God is shining a flashlight on those divine ideas so our little human brains can see them. It's a pretty mystical idea.
It is. But of course, not everyone was on board with this whole divine illumination thing.
Yeah, figures. Who wants to admit they need help, right?
Exactly. The folks who leaned more towards Aristotle's, down-to-earth approach, they questioned the need for all that divine intervention.
Right. Like if we can figure out triangularity just by looking at enough triangles, why not other universals?
Right. That's their argument. If abstraction works for some things, why not everything? A little more intellectually independent, you might say.
I can see that. So it's like, do we need God's help to understand these big concepts, or can we figure it out on our own?
That's the million-dollar question, illumination versus abstraction. Do we need a divine boost, or is our natural reason enough?
That's a tough one.
You said it, and of course, some philosophers tried to split the difference,
I'll
right?
find that middle ground.
Exactly. Matthew of Aquasparta, for example, he suggests that maybe Aristotle explains the what of our concepts, while Augustine explains the why.
I like that, yeah. Abstraction for the everyday stuff, illumination for the deeper truths. Kind of a philosophical tag team.
Exactly. Now, I can't leave out another major player in this whole debate, Peter Abelard. He comes in with his own unique solution to the problem of universals, centered on this idea of status.
Status. Now, hold on. Are we talking Facebook relationship status here?
Not quite. Abelard was arguing that universals, they exist as status. Not a thing exactly, but the reason why we use the same word for different things. So like think about human. What makes all these different individuals human?
Yeah. What does connect us all as humans? It's not like we're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah,
Right? And it's not just a word either.
Right. So Abelard's saying it's not a physical thing, not just a thought in our heads, but rather their status of being human.
Okay, so being human, it's out there, kind of like an invisible force field connecting us all.
It's tricky, yeah. But it's this status, this reality that exists whether we're thinking about it or not.
It's a head-scratcher for sure, but I see how it avoids some of those contradictions we talked about before. No more worrying about that perfect triangle.
Exactly. But Abelard's theory, it's pretty complex, and honestly, it raised more questions than it answered. It, at least for many people, didn't quite catch on the way some other ideas did.
So the search continues. We're still looking for that perfect solution to the problem of universals. Where do we go from here?
Well, next up, we'll be talking about Avicenna. Now, he's a fascinating figure who added a whole other layer to this debate. And his ideas, they had a big influence on Aquinas, for example, really shaped the way medieval thinkers viewed the nature of reality itself.
Okay, I'm ready for more. This is making me realize how much we take these simple concepts for granted. It's like we're peeling back the layers of reality itself. Okay, so we've heard from Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, Augustine. It's like a who's who of philosophy. We've got these divine ideas floating around and status connecting everything. But are we any closer to solving this whole universal problem?
Well, the debate heats up even more as we move into the later Middle Ages. You start to see this real philosophical showdown.
Oh, tell me more. Who's facing off?
In one corner, you have the realists. They're carrying the torch from guys like Plato and Augustine. They believe in these inherent common natures, essences that exist out there in the world.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But who's in the other corner?
That's where the nominalists step in. And they're coming in, swinging, ready to shake things up with a whole new way of looking at universals.
Nominalists, huh? The name droppers of the philosophical world. I'm guessing they're all about, well, names.
You got it. And their champion, he's a big one, William of Ockham. Maybe you've heard of Occam's razor.
Rings a bell, yeah. Isn't that the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best?
That's the one. And Occam, he takes that razor and applies it to this whole problem of universals, slicing away all that complexity we've been wading through.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Less metaphysics, more getting down to brass tacks.
Exactly. Occam says, forget separate realms, forget divine ideas, all that. Universals, they're just terms, words we use to group similar things together. There's no catness essence out there, just the word cat that we all agree to use for, those furry little creatures.
So instead of saying all cats share some mystical essence, we're just using a handy label.
Pretty much. It's more like a community agreement. We agree to use cat for those animals, red for that color, and so on. But there's no grand cosmic structure dictating any of this. Occam brings it all back down to language, how we use it to understand the world.
I can see the appeal, I have to say. It's a clean break from all those philosophical headaches. But isn't it a bit reductive? Like we're losing something important about how our minds actually connect to reality.
And there's the heart of the debate. You've got the Via Antiqua, the old way, holding on to realism, those inherent natures. It's complex, nuanced, but also maybe prone to contradictions. And then you've got Occam's Via Moderna, the modern way, with its streamlined, language-focused approach. Much more straightforward, but maybe too simple for some people.
The battle of the ways. Realists versus nominalists. So who won?
That's the thing. There's no clear winner. Each side had its strengths, its weaknesses. Occam's view definitely became super influential, but it didn't completely settle the debate. And really, these are questions we're still grappling with today, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, this whole deep dive has really driven home how much philosophy is woven into our everyday thinking, even if we don't always realize it. We're constantly categorizing, naming, using language to make sense of things, and it's all connected to these fundamental questions about universals.
Exactly. Whether you lean towards realism or nominalism or somewhere in between, exploring this debate helps us understand how we make sense of reality, how our minds work, how we use language to communicate. It's pretty amazing stuff.
It really is. From Plato's otherworldly forms to Occam's down-to-earth terms, this has been quite a journey. And it's a journey that takes us to the core of knowledge, language, and even the very nature of reality itself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, to our listeners out there, I encourage you dive into the source material yourselves. See what these thinkers had to say. Where do you stand on this whole problem of universals? It's a question that's resonated for centuries, and it continues to challenge and inspire us today.
Well said. We've only just scratched the surface here, but hopefully we've given you a taste of how fascinating and relevant this debate really is. So, until next time, keep thinking, keep exploring, and keep those philosophical wheels turning.